Ah, pura vida, much love and respect. Shalom, halito. How you guys doing? Thanks for tuning in one more time. Well, I thought since Juneteenth was coming, that I would make a video regarding it. I wanted to do it all these years, and I just never really focused on it. And I said to myself, why don't I just do it? And let me look into it. I've already had heard certain things, and I just wanted to verify. So that's one of the things I want to show in this video and point out, is you got to go with the research, and you got to be logical. You got to look at the historic information, who these people are, who was in this area, what was going on, who the first settlers were, who they were dealing with. Was it really Africans they were bringing? What time periods are we talking about? What slave ships are they talking about? What is the real story? Who was the real inhabitants, original inhabitants of Galveston, Texas? A lot of you may not know the tribes that I'm going to focus on today, so I wanted to bring it to your attention, their story, who they were, what they dealt with, what they're still dealing with. And in respect and honor to the history and the memory of what happened and what these people went through, I thought it would only be right to go ahead and correct the false narratives and provide you a bit of information that was not told to us in school or provided to us the correct way when it comes to all these stories, right, of American slavery. For all the Pan-Africans out there listening, just wait till the end of the video. And if you're new to the channel, catch up to the presentations. Over 300 presentations. We've already debunked the out of Africa theories. We know that in America there was so-called Negro people here that were not from Africa, and all over the world too there was, and they weren't also originally all from Africa just because they were so-called dark complexion. We know that Indian slavery was very heavy in the United States. We've done numerous presentations on that, proving it. So to all the returning viewers and followers, make sure you put everything, all that, what we've learned into perspective. We know that the original colonists were also so-called black. These were black Europeans. We're going to read today a lot of these people who they really were. Sephardic Moorish people, yes, that was actually settling originally in this region of the world in Galveston, Texas, the land of the Karankawa Indians and the Atakapa Indians. Hope you guys enjoyed today's presentation. Wow. Let's begin. PBS.org. Learn about and celebrate Juneteenth. What is Juneteenth? The holiday's origin story begins in Galveston, Texas. Oh, okay, so it's in Galveston, Texas. All right, Texas. Not the whole of America, North America, right? Texas, Galveston specifically, which was the westernmost area of the Union in 1865. When enslaved people there were told of their emancipation on June 19th, 1865, they had technically already been freed 2.5 years prior, when the president Abraham Lincoln, all right, we know him, those so-called Negro man, Abraham Lincoln, very swarthy, issued the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863. So the enslaved people that was there. So who was the enslaved people that was there? Okay, that's the question, right? So it's happening in Galveston, Texas, to people who are enslaved there in that location. Slaveholders in Texas had kept the information to themselves, extending the period of violent exploitation of enslaved African Americans. Oh, so-called African Americans, right? Now they're calling them African Americans. So that's who they're saying is being enslaved there, right? So who's these so-called African Americans? We've already debunked that whole so-called African American tag, right, guys? Let's get specific, right? We're at the point where we got to start getting specific. I hope there's a lot of Pan-African believers out there, and I hope you guys pay attention today. We got to start getting specific. Prove to me any of these people that were enslaved right? That they're saying when these people were enslaved there in Galveston, proved to me that they're actually from Africa. The following year in 1866, a celebration was had in Texas, the first Juneteenth observance to recognize freedom from slavery in the U.S. What does Wikipedia tell us? Well, Wikipedia says, Juneteenth National Independence Day, and also known as Jubilee Day, Emancipation Day, Freedom Day, and Black Independence Day, so-called black crayon colors, is a federal holiday in the United States commemorating emancipation of enslaved African Americans. All right, here he goes again, saying so-called African Americans. They put in that African tag on you again, when we know that all started about the 80s, and we know genealogy and history is telling us something completely different. Let's not go backwards. Again, if you're new to the channel, just wait till the end of the video and catch up with the presentations. You're 5 years late and over 300 presentations behind. Catch up. Get in the classroom. It says here, it is also often observed for celebrating African American culture. Originated in Galveston, Texas, all right? When they got that point across, so it started there in Galveston, right? That's where it happened. It has been celebrated annually on June 19th in various parts of the United States since 1865, according to them, right? The day was recognized as a federal holiday on June 17th, 2021, but it wasn't really recognized federally until last year, all right? Thanks, Biden. Thanks. Signed the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act into law. Juneteenth commemoration is on the anniversary date of the June 19, 1865, announcement of General Order Number 3 by Union Army General Gordon Granger, proclaiming freedom for enslaved people in Texas. All right, enslaved people. Now that's a different way to say it, right? Not just saying so-called African Americans to try to label a specific people. Now that's a whole different thing when you're saying they freed enslaved people that was there in that location. Now that's something else, which was the last state of the Confederacy with institutional slavery. All right. So, that's your mainstream Google search narratives, right? That most people, that's all they know. That's all they care to know. They don't do any further research. And that's why they believe they're right. So this happened in Galveston, Texas, right? So let's learn a little bit about this. Let's start getting specific. Let's see what's really going on here, right? So it says here in visit galveston.com, history of Galveston. It says Galveston has a fascinating and storied past, from devastating storms to Civil War battles. Before the 1900 storm, all right, we're going to learn about this. Galveston was the second richest city per capita in the United States. Second richest city, all right? The second richest city, and was even dubbed the Wall Street of the South due to its flourishing banking industry, who was the bankers, and the retail success of the Strand. Among many of its Texas first, there are over 100, and it had Texas First Bank and First Post Office. But who was really in Galveston there first? Who was in Galveston first? The first inhabitants in Galveston were the Karankawa Indians. We're going to be talking a lot about them today. In the 16th century, they were joined at one point by the island's first noted visitor, a shipwrecked Spanish explorer named Cabeza de Vaca. Cowhead, Cabeza de Vaca. In 1528, all right? He was forced to live among the Karankawa, serving as a medicine man and a slave. All right, they had enslaved, and we're going to read a little bit about that story today. So we know that the Karankawa, from its initial point, was not very friendly with these Sephardic Moorish colonists. Let's not forget. Let's put everything into clear perspective here when we're talking about a more on more war. Shout out to 432 The Drop Radio, come drop. It says here pirates. Later visitors included corsairs like the French Jean Lafitte, who built the small colony of Campeche in 1817. All right, we're gonna learn about him. This French guy, so-called French guy, right? The French, huh? Ever the privateer, right? He's a pirate, privateer, so-called privateer, pirate, French pirate. Who was the pirates? Again, let's put everything into perspective. Everything we've learned. This privateer, he used this as a base to raid Spanish merchant ships that passed through the Gulf. He fled after a decade, burning down the community he built. His treasures are rumored to be buried on the island. All right? Very crazy story. Then it says in 1836, Canadian fur trader Michael B. Bernard purchased 7 square miles of land, which became the city of Galveston. It was the same year Texas gained independence from Mexico and became a republic. That same year, 1830s, right? Other great changes followed. Business flourished, and Galveston became a major Jewish commercial center and one of the largest ports in the United States. It was second to Ellis Island as an immigration port. All right, early 1800s. Listen, immigrants coming in, 1830. From the 1830s. By 1880s, it was the largest and richest city in Texas. And again, whose land was this? All these immigrants becoming rich. Whose land they're taking? The Karankawa Indians, who were not friendly at all, right from the beginning. And we're gonna keep reading how unfriendly they were until they supposedly became extinct. With the Wall Street of the South, okay? Now, the Great Storm of 1900. A tragedy that was the Great Storm is the worst natural disaster recorded in North America. Did somebody get punished for what was going on? It hit Galveston on September 8th, 1900. Few managed to evacuate before the bridges to the mainland collapsed, resulting in the loss of more than 6,000 lives. 6,000? What 6,000 lives? Who was there? Due to a lack of storm monitoring equipment, residents had little warning to evacuate when surging seas and high winds enveloped the island. All right? It's saying this was the worst hurricane ever in U.S. history. All right? In 1900s, look at these buildings that are still standing. Look at that architecture. All right? What's going on? Are we talking about a reset here? Mud flood? Well, what's going on? Is this part of it? Was it really a hurricane? And if so, natural disaster this bad? Wow, was the Great Spirit mad? Mother Nature, Mama? So after this, Galveston, being the resilient city that it is, raised most of the island 17 feet to create Seawall Boulevard. It took around 8 years to complete the raising of 500 city blocks, all done by hand to prevent damage from future storms. People walked on raised wooden sidewalks during the construction, which also included building 2,000 homes. All right, they rebuilt a whole island. The storm led to the development of the celebrated seawall and a shift away from being a trade center to an entertainment and gambling hub. It became a mafia haven. A popular haunt was the Balinese Room, a famous nightclub on the pier that hosted some of the biggest names of the era, even Frank Sinatra. It was also an illegal casino that invited much mob activity. Sadly, the structure was destroyed by the Hurricane Ike on September 13, 2008. History of Galveston, Texas. We're in Wikipedia. Just going to keep learning a little bit more, right? Now it says here the first European settlements on the island were constructed around 1816. All right. This is when they're really just setting up shop. Listen, that's very recent. All right. That's a very important date. I'm going to show you why. This is when they're really establishing themselves there. What are you talking about, slaves? Slaves? In 1816, it says the port of Galveston was established in 1825 by the Congress of Mexico following its successful revolution from Spain. So Galveston was founded in 1836 by Michael Bernard, Samuel May Williams, and Thomas F. McKinney. Now listen to this. It says, during the mid-19th century, 1800s, Galveston emerged as an international city with immigration and trade from around the U.S. and the world. The city became one of the nation's busiest ports and the world's leading port for cotton exports. Galveston became Texas' largest city, and during that era was its prime commercial center. In 1900, the island was struck by a devastating hurricane. Even post-Hurricane Katrina, this event holds the record as the United States' deadliest natural disaster. During the 1920s and 1930s, the city reemerged as a major tourist destination centered on casinos and other vice businesses, featuring venues such as the famed Balinese Room. The city became nationally known as the Sin City of the Gulf. All right, see what they turned it into after the hurricane? The illegal businesses were finally closed in the 1950s, leading to a long, stagnant economic period. All right, the city gradually reemerged as a tourist destination centered on its history and its historical buildings. All right, so it became a tourist attraction, a lot of theme parks there after that. All right, now the history says Galveston Island was originally inhabited by members of the Karankawa, all right, and the Atakapa tribes. The Atakapa tribes who used the name Wea for the island, Atakapa and Karankawa. We're going to get back to these two tribes. Let's keep reading real quick. It says, in 1519, the Alonso Alvarez de Pineda expedition sailed past Galveston Island en route from the Florida Peninsula to the Panuco River. Pineda may or may not have actually seen the island. However, Spain laid claim to the entire Gulf Coast, including Galveston Island, based on the 1519 Pineda expedition. All right, so those people never landed there. Soon afterwards, Cabeza de Vaca and his crew were shipwrecked on the island or nearby in November 1528, calling it Isla de Malhado, Isle of Doom. And from there began his famous trek to Mexico. Various Spanish explorers charted the region referred to the island as the Isla Blanca, or White Island, and later Isla de Aranjuez, or Aranjuez Island. In 1685, French explorer Lassalle named the island St. Louis, and the name became fixed for some time. So you see, these people are exploring, they're not really settled in there yet, and it's an island of doom for a big reason, all right? Big reason. Now, this is what I'm trying to explain to you. The first permanent European settlement, all right? The first permanent European settlements, all right? Before that, there was no European settlements there. You guys paying attention? All right? On the island were constructed around 1816. This is recent. By the pirate Louis Michel Ory. By pirates? Are you serious? Pirates from the early, this is almost 1700, right? 1816. We're talking about Sephardic Moorish people, pirates. They're settled in this place. This is the first settlements as a base of operations to support Mexico's rebellion against Spain, against the Catholics, remember? Against the Catholics. In 1817, Ory returned from an unsuccessful raid against Spain to find the island occupied by the pirate Jean Lafitte. So another pirate, Mr. Jean Lafitte, right, who took up residence there after having been driven from his stronghold in Barataria Bay off the coast of New Orleans, Louisiana. Lafitte organized the island's settlement into a pirate kingdom. He made a pirate kingdom. He called Campeche, anointing himself the head of government. Lafitte remained at Campeche until 1821, when he and his raiders were given an ultimatum by the United States Navy: leave or be destroyed. Lafitte burned his settlement to the ground and sailed under cover of night for parts unknown. All right, you hear all the crazy stuff that's going on here? I want to make sure you guys understand this big point here. Now it says here, the first permanent European settlement on the island were constructed around 1816, not before that, 1816. So they wouldn't need labor to help them construct these settlements, right? Before that, they wouldn't need slaves before that, right? Because they wasn't constructing anything there before that, right? I'm gonna leave this in front of you real quick because I got a very logical, educated, historical question for believers of Pan-Africanism. For those who believe that all so-called black people were slaves, or just anybody who believes the mention of a person being called a slave, automatically you are assuming it's an African. Now it says here, act prohibiting importation of slaves. When did the U.S. stop importing supposedly slaves, right? They didn't say from African slaves, they say slaves here, right? It doesn't say importation of African slaves. It says the importation of any kind of slave, right? Any. So we're supposed to assume, yeah, well, that includes Africa, right? Curimeo. Well, either way, right? In your belief, right? In your belief, either way, the act prohibiting importation of slaves of 1807. Listen up, 1807. When was Galveston first settled? 1816. There was no more incoming slaves by 1816, if that's what you want to go with. Again, this act provided that no new slaves were permitted to be imported into the United States. It took effect on January 1st, 1808, the earliest date permitted by the United States Constitution. You're right. So going back to the history of Galveston, it's clearly telling us that they didn't have nothing there until 1816. And slavery, importation of slaves, wherever they were supposedly coming from, wasn't happening anymore. Now, let's be very logical. Were indigenous people in America not getting enslaved? What happened to the Karankawa or the Atakapas people that were there? What happened? They just became successful and prospered in this golden era too? What happened? Again, so we got the original inhabitants of this location as the Karankawa, right? And the Atakapas tribes. We're going to get back to the Karankawa. That's our main tribe. We're going to talk a lot about the Karankawa today. Just real quick, we're going to go talk about who the Atakapas are. The Atakapas were the indigenous tribe that lived on the Galveston Bay and the Lower Trinity and San Jacinto rivers in Texas, primarily in the present-day Greater Houston area. They are regarded as a band of the Atakapa Indians, closely related to the Atakapa of Lake Charles, Louisiana. So the Atakapas are Atakapa Indians, right? From my past videos, if you guys remember, we already understand who the Atakapa, what they look like mainly, how they were being described. All right, the Atakapa people. And just look how it says Atakapa Ishak or Isaac, Ishak, Itza, Atakapa. Now let me show you this other picture down here. You got to scroll down to get a nice good image. All right, here. Check this one out right here. All right, take a look. You see that? That's an Atakapa Indian. Look at that. So-called Negro, right? Look at everything here. Phenotype. And maybe, that's just a drawing. It's actually a historic drawing of the Atakapa. So you guys don't think I'm just making things up here and trying to make people, or like people are saying these days, blackwash. It's not even about that. It's about truth. This is from the Lake Charles Atakapas book written by Dr. J.O. Dyer. Let me just zoom in so you guys can see the cover. All right, the Lake Charles Atakapas, period of 1817 to 1820. And, they're trying to label them cannibals, all right? So dodge the hijack. Written by request for the Howard Memorial Library, Dr. J.O. Dyer. Okay, what does it say about the Atakapa people? All right, now remember, this is the image we were seeing, all right, in Wikipedia. And this is another image here, colorized the same image. And it's from a bigger image. And everybody in this image, all the indigenous people portrayed here, are very swarthy. Look how they label him a Negro. He looks with his Moorish attire, I would say. And this is the Atakapas Indian. Let me show you. See that? All right. Do you remember who you are? What you mean African? So let's see what it's saying here. It says here, it was in the year 1819, all right? Again, 1800s. That's when they just got there. Remember, they settled in 1816 and started building, and then this is in 1819 when an American officer entered the Lake Charles village of the Atakapas on a cold October day. Colonel Graham had been on official business at the Lafitte camp. Remember the pirate Lafitte at Galveston, all right? We're in Galveston, same place where Juneteenth happened, right? And was making his way from Bolivar by land to the Vermilion Bridge. Now, what happened when he saw the Indians? It says the savages, who were the coastal clan of interior tribes, were of a very low type of civilization. All right, dodge the hijack. They were dark-skinned, Again, what? They were what? They were dark-skinned, yeah, so-called Negro, yeah, copper-colored, yeah, so-called black, yeah, they were dark-skinned, with dirty, short, coarse, black matted hair, coarse, black matted hair. Are you listening? All right? Debunked, you got debunked right here, debunked, primary source. Are you listening? This is a so-called Negro man. He would be considered, right? He would be called today, that description. If a police gave that description, hey, who's the suspect? If a police officer said, hey, the suspect, it's a dark-skinned young man, coarse black matted hair. Yeah, so let's be real about it. You know what I'm talking about. All right, they were dark-skinned with dirty, short, coarse black matted hair, their bodies stout, statured, short, and heads of a large size placed almost between the shoulders. Who are they talking about again? The Atakapas, all right? The Atakapas who were in Galveston, right? Who were in Galveston. In the same book, there's another reference to the Atakapas. It says that the tribe, how likened to the type featured of an unpleasant cast, especially large heads, dark skins, all right? Dark skins and prominent facial features. Prominent features, right? In the face, prominent of an unpleasant cast, especially noticeable were the high cheekbones and protruding lips. The Atakapas. So I hope it's clear that the Atakapas, right, are people that would definitely be classified as colored, right, so-called Negro, so-called black. And again, the Akokisa, who were in Galveston Bay, are Atakapa Indians, closely related to the Atakapas of Lake Charles, the same people we were just talking about. They're related, they're the same, so they must look the same in appearance, right? The Akokisa. So again, Galveston Island was originally inhabited by members of the Karankawa and Atakapas tribes. All right, we got one of them. We know they're so-called Negroes. All right, so I just want to go into this Louisiana State Archives website. Found a great video here, great interview. We actually got a pretty modern day chief of the Atakapas, right? So you guys can look at a representation of these people, all right, in the Galveston area in Louisiana. We're going to hear from Chief Michael Amos.
My first question, Chief, is your name.
Well, Michael Amos.
And how old are you, Chief?
67.
And what's your occupation?
I'm retired.
And what did you do prior to that?
I was in the military, retired military.
Okay. And your tribal membership?
You mean blood quantum?
Yes.
Okay, it's not required.
Okay.
Only the lineage is required.
Okay.
I just did mine because I wanted to.
Okay.
It's not required.
All right. And what's your position in the tribe?
I'm the principal chief of the tribe. We cover Southwest Louisiana and Southeast Texas.
Okay.
So.
Okay. What is the name of your tribe in their native language?
Ishak, I-S-H-A-K, Ishak. The slur word was Atakapa, okay? It was given by the Choctaw, and then when the Spanish and the French came over, they kept the word up, Atakapa.
Mm-hmm.
But our real name was really Ishak, you know. So that would be the name from the beginning of time, you know, with the tribe. Yes.
Where did your tribe, what is the origin of your tribe? How did your tribe begin? Where did it start from?
Well, there's a lot of saying. Some say we came from the sea. We don't really know, but the Ishak been here for like 4,000 years, BC. So, but the Ishak been here for like 4,000 years. We don't really know. There's a lot of write-ups about Egypt and stuff like that during the Ice Age. But there's nothing really solid that I know of that where it actually originated from, except here. Okay, the tribe was basically Opelousas in the St. Martinsville, Honorville area, all the way to Lake Charles, Calcasieu, to Alexandria, through Natchitoches. And also, if you go into East Texas, to Galveston, Matagorda Bay, all the way down. We have 2 clans in Texas and 4 in Louisiana. If you go back up to 1802, all this was called Atakapa territory. See, so the Ishak were here all this time, and that was the inhabited all this land and all this area, pretty much, all the way to Galveston, all the way to Galveston.
I'm going to read from this book here, Archaeological and Ethnological Papers of the Peabody Museum, Harvard University, Volume 1, Number 2, The Karankawa Indians, The Coast People of Texas, by Albert S. Gatchett, United States Bureau of Ethnology. It says here, Notes on the Karankawa Indians, by Alice W. Oliver. Before the commencement of the war with Mexico, which secured to Texas her independence, there seems to be no record of the Karankawa tribe of Indians, though they had probably long been inhabitants of the country. At that time, they were a very powerful and warlike nation, exceedingly dreaded by the Mexicans and by other tribes of Indians for their unparalleled ferocity and cruelty. As a dash to hijack, they were cannibals, and horrible stories are still told of atrocities perpetrated upon certain isolated families who were among the pioneers upon the coast of Texas. All right, pioneers, no, conquistadors, enslavers, not pioneers. These people were murdering the indigenous population. They wanted them moved. So you see how they word this? We're going to read an article, how they were literally doing this on purpose to make them look like cannibals when they weren't really cannibals. After the close of the war and the establishment of American rule, these Indians continued the same wandering ways regarding their domestic life as they had always observed. They had never any settled abiding place, but wandered from point to point all along the coast, now no longer free to come and go or linger at their pleasure, but living their lives under protest as it were, and only on sufferance. As their tribal strength declined and they realized that their traditions were the only inheritance of their children, and that the deeds of their generation could never add any luster to the record, that in a few years they would be utterly extinguished as a nation, the spirit seemed to die within them, and their degradation was complete. Their life remained unchanged in its general features. The chase and fishing had always been their chief dependence, and so it continued to a great extent. Their habits were primitive in the extreme, but there, as always, the blighting touch of civilization left its baneful trace and hastened the doom of the fast diminishing tribe. They had always lived an itinerant life, passing in their dugouts, which were long and very narrow, yet capacious from spot to spot, stopping generally where some settler had made his home, always where fresh water and brushwood for their fire were easily attainable. I wanted to read this part. I thought it was interesting. It says, one tall Indian, probably a chief, stood within the circle and passed round and round the fire, chanting in a monotonous tone. He was a grotesque figure, being wrapped up, his head in skins, and his face concealed. His long black hair streamed over his back, and he bent nearly double as he moved about, seldom raising himself to an erect posture. The chant rose and fell in a melancholy sort of cadence, and occasionally all the Indians joined in the chorus, which was hey-ya, 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 hey-ya. All right, you hear that? That's what he was saying. Hey-ya, 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 I am, huh? The first two words were shouted slowly, then a loud hey-ya, then a succession of hey-yas, very rapidly uttered in chromatic ascending and descending tones, ending in an abrupt hey-ya, very loud and far-reaching. There were three instruments of music upon which the Indians accompanied the chant. One, a large gourd filled with small stones or shot, was frequently shaken. Another was a fluted piece of wood, which was held upon the knees of the player, and over which a stick was quickly drawn, producing a droning noise. The third was a kind of rude flute upon which no air was played, but which was slowly blown in time to the chant. All right, so you hear that? Hey-ya, 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 the Karankawas. It says The Karankawa Indians by Albert S. Gatchett of the U.S. Bureau of Ethnology. It says here, with our knowledge of the Karankawa Indians, chance has played a capricious game as well as with that of many other tribes. Although their tribe figures as a people of consequence in Texan colonial history, the information left us by the chroniclers of the time does not give the necessary points enabling us to classify them according to race and language. Their records report that cruelties were inflicted by them upon harmless settlers. Oh, they were so harmless. So you see how they're writing this? First they call them cannibals. Now they're saying now they were troublemakers, right? They kept messing with the harmless settlers. They discuss their bodily appearance, their weapons, implements, and canoes, with some of their customs, but they are silent concerning their religious ideas, their migrations, their tribal government, and especially their language, which is the most important characteristic of each tribe. And we have to deplore that even in our scientific age, so little attention is paid to the tongues of primitive nations. So continues, says the earliest reports we possess on the coast tribes among which the Karankawas have dwelt during the historic period is contained in the 26th chapter of the Naufragos composed by Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca, one of the 4 men who were saved from the unfortunate expedition of Pamfilo de Narvaez. From 1527 he subsisted for 7 years among the coast tribes, destitute of everything, even of garments, but as a trader and medical practitioner he managed to earn a scanty living, right? He was a slave to the Karankawas. They had him prisoner, but he was able to survive there. I hustle. He was a hustler. All right, so the Karankawas again constantly beefing and hostile relationships with these settlers always, since the beginning. Continuing, says here, at the end of the 18th century, we meet with some Spanish Mexican documents which give us an insight into the civil condition of the Karankawa and of some of the coast tribes of their neighborhood. A document preserved in the State Archives in Austin, consulted by me in December 1884, is dated 1793 and mentions the foundation of missions among the Karankawas and Colorado River, among the Cocos, perhaps near the Sabine River. All right, and it says here, continuing, it says it is impossible to Christianize the Karankawas. All right, so they start establishing these missions after they start rounding up the Karankawas because they can't stop them. They do this by force. They're gonna tell us here, so they tell you all the different places. And one of the earlier famous ones was Nuestra Señora del Refugio, where other Karankahueses live under the superintendence of Father Garza. All right, and it talks about that place. It says here the Spaniards were in the habit of peopling their missions with the Indians of the neighboring tribes by using military force. The mission of Nuestra Señora del Refugio was established in 1790 and had 67 Indians in 1793. All right, so it keeps talking about different census there, about the Indians. Another mission where some Karankawas had been settled with Aranama Indians and perhaps with other tribes also was La Bahia del Espíritu Santo on the southern bank of San Antonio River, and lying a little below the city of Goliad. A short distance separated it from Refugio, which is almost due south. A census of the mission taken in 1789 shows 82 individuals. All right, they're telling you they're putting them there in these missions, right? The Karankawa. The reports concerning these coast people, which date from the beginning of the 19th century, differ considerably from the earlier ones by the constant reference made to the unparalleled ferocity and cruelty and the desultory, unforeseen attacks of these barbarians. You see how they talk about them? You see why they wanted to put them in missions? Why do you think these Indians are so upset at these settlers? And why do you think they're calling the barbarians cannibals and savage and fierce? Because they're scared of them, because they weren't playing, these Karankawas. Horrible stories are still told by the descendants of the settlers of the cannibalistic atrocities practiced upon the isolated families of their ancestors who had settled in these coast tracts. All right, Tashta hijack, they made that all up. Not only the whites, Tashta hijack, what whites, felt the rage of these aborigines who began to see that gradually their coastlands would slip from their hitherto almost undisputed control. All right, they were seeing what the Karankawa were like, yo, you guys are trying to take our land. You're trying to take our land. But also intertribal contests with the Lipans, Aranamas, and Tonkawi, Bidai, chiefly with the Comanches, whom they greatly feared, called the Karankawa warriors to arms, and inflicted heavy losses upon them before Texas became an independent commonwealth. So they had beef with the local tribes, some local tribes, and they had to deal with the settlers, right? Thus, the ferocity of the Karankawas is easily accounted for when we consider the brutalities which they experienced at the hands of the white people who came to deprive them of their fishing grounds and coast tracks, and moreover interfered with their family connections. Listen to it, they had a reason. All right, so now it's not so barbaric, right? When it's self-defense and when you're the invader in their land, their indigenous land, all right? And these so-called whiteys were Moors, Sephardic Jewish Moors, Huguenot pirates, a lot of them, most of them at this time. Let's not forget, let's put it all in perspective. While Galveston Island was occupied by the well-known pirate Lafitte, all right, like I said, a pirate named Lafitte, some of his men in 1818 abducted one of the Karankawa women to revenge this injury. About 300 of these Indians landed on the sandbar near the 3 trees, all right? So there was a big war because of this. All right, so it continues to list the different times they were just at war and that they Karankawas were, massacring or invading the settlements. It says encounters between the settlers and the Karankawas Indians occurred not only on the coast but also in the upper parts of the Texan Tidewater section. All right, so they list one in 1823. We keep going. It's talking about while engaged in surveying lands in 1824, Captain Kreisman had several skirmishes with the Karankawas on the St. Bernard River in Gulf Prairie. All right, so they're beefing, right? The destinies of this littoral nation began to take a decisive turn in 1825 when the Anglo-American colonists, who had largely increased in numbers, now that they got their numbers up, remember they started immigrating there in Galveston, remember what we heard earlier? And they had their little golden age, they started becoming rich. After they got rich, what did they do? They did a confederate, they got together, right? They became together, they band together to rid themselves of these predatory Indians. What you just told us that they had a right for them to fight back. Now you're telling me they're predatory when this is their land. You're the predatory settlers. You see how they worded this, right? They're calling them predatory Indians who had become exasperated by their frequent losses of warriors and revenged themselves by stealing and murdering. Colonel Austin requested Captain Abner Kunkendall to gather a corps of volunteers and to expel the Indians from this land grant, which extended west to the La Vaca River. Now, what do you think that means? All right, guys, what do you think that means? To expel these Indians, expel them to where? What does that mean? That's slavery, right? To servitude. Expel, where else are they going to expel them? Who? Indians, Karankawas, right? The Indians were routed, and while the troops pursued them, they were met at the Manahuila Creek, 6 miles east of Goliath City, by a Catholic missionary of La Bahia, who took the refugees under his protection. You see what they did? So they rounded them off to this mission, and they had no choice. The father said, "Don't worry, I'll save you. God wants you to be here." You see this? They were slick. They weren't going to kill him, but they said, "Let's put them in the mission. Let's put them in the mission." And so that was their only choice, and that's how they ended up in the mission. It was that or death. It was that or death. That was so slick. So he took the refugees under his protection. He conveyed the promise of these Indians that they would never show themselves again east of La Vaca River, and the promise was accepted, but they did not keep the compact for any length of time. Portions of them returned to the Colorado River, committed new depredations, and were scorched again by the colonists. This defeat is evidently the same event which is narrated by relative of Stephen Austin, Mrs. Mary Austin Holly, in her book. All right. So just before we leave this book, it says here the physical character. Right, let's see what they say, right? It says the appearance of the Karankawa men and women can now only be described from the impressions they made on persons who lived in their country, as we have no accurate anthropologic data or measurements to determine it scientifically. All witnesses from earlier and later epochs are unanimous in describing their men as very tall. All right, the men were described as being very tall, magnificently formed, strongly built, like very muscular, and approaching perfection in their bodily proportions. Many Southerners regarded them as giants. All right, many of them said they're giants, and Miss Oliver ventured the opinion that they measured about 5 feet and 10 inches. No skeletons or skulls are known to exist, which could give a decisive proof of this statement. Their hair was as coarse as that of horses, all right? Coarse like horses. Coarse, and perhaps owing to their being bareheaded, it often assumed a reddish hue. They were not prognostic, nor showed they more than ordinary Indian proportions in their cheekbones or in the thyroid cartilage, but their foreheads were mostly low and broad, and the heads larger than those of the Anglo-American race. All had splendid white teeth, even in their older years. A considerable difference was perceptible between the deportment of males and that of females. That of the men was, even when their bodies were of a heavy exterior, free, lithe, and graceful, their complexion was rather light colored than of the cinnamon hue. All right, so they're saying that the men were cinnamon hue. The men were cinnamon hue, since they ate more venison than fish. Although their jaws looked heavy, their chin was small and their lips thin, which agreed well with the long and slender hands and feet observed in many individuals. In some cases, the fingers tapered off most gracefully and ended up in delicate-looking nails, the palm of the hand showing no callosities. Many men wore the hair so long as to reach the waist, and while sitting on their mats of skin, they were in the habit of crossing the legs. Of a cinnamon hue, huh? So, and the women of a lighter complexion. Just like how it looks right here, it says the Karankawa Indians of the Gulf Coast, watercolor by Lino Sanchez y Tapia. Huh? The Karankawa Indians. Says here how the fight to protect slavery led to the Texas Revolution by Lynn Burnett. Just want to read this part. It says Austin also developed militias to drive out local indigenous peoples, referring to the local Karankawa tribe. Austin ordered the militia to pursue and kill all those Indians wherever they are found. The small and relatively powerless tribe was decimated. All right, they were targeting the Karankawa, putting them in missions, murdering them. And where else do you think they were doing? Putting them to servitude, right? So-called slavery. So these people ain't giving up, since the beginning. They're, at war with the settlers. They ain't taking no treaties. They ain't trying to do no peace. They really don't like the hijack, So what do? They start trying to run them out of their own lands, murder them, enslave them. It says here, more studies in Brownsville history, edited by Milo Kearney. Talking about Padre Nicolas here. It says even though he stayed in refugio, remember that was a mission, he stayed at the Lafitte ranch often enough to own a house there, as well as keeping a statue of the Virgin de la Soledad and communion equipment on hand. Furthermore, the Padre's duties as resident priest of the area from 1800s to 1829, listen to what he was trying to do, included the religious ministry of all the ranches on both sides of the river, up to Reynosa. The Padre also built a mission for the Karankawa Indians. He built a mission just for who? Specifically for who? The Karankawa Indians on Padre Island, where he personally worked to convert them. All right? He wanted to convert them so bad. So remember, in the history of Galveston, right, it told us who's the first inhabitants, right? Originally inhabited by the members of Karankawa and Atakapas, the Atakapa people, right? Now, what was going on while all these people were being rounded up, right? Expelled, put in missions, massacred, all of a sudden going extinct. There was a golden era in Galveston, right? It was a golden era. It was becoming a metropolis. During the golden era of Galveston history, the city was home to a number of states first, to include the first post office, the first Texas chapter of Masonic order, the first naval base, the first cotton compress, the first parochial schools, the first insurance company, the first gas lights, first Roman Catholic hospitals, the first Jewish Reformed congregation, the first opera house, the first orphanage, right? So-called. Remember, these buildings are probably a lot older than what they're telling us. Check out the mud flood history, the reset, World's Fairs, research going on all over the place. During the mid-19th century, right, the 1800s, right, 1850s, Galveston, though not a large city by world standards, emerged as an international city with immigration and trade from around the U.S. and around the world. The island has sometimes been called the Ellis Island of the West, and it was a primary point of entry for European immigrants settling in the western United States, all right? This is like an Ellis Island. See what they were doing? They were replacing who? The Karankawa and the Atakapas, the local tribes, and bringing in all these people. German immigration during this period was so great that the German language became a commonly used language on the city's streets, all right? This here, Native Transgressions, they look at the portrayal of Karankawa natives in Texas history, textbooks, and trade books, right? So remember, now these people had possession of very prestigious land, fertile land, strategic points for colonists that wanted to come in. So of course, when history wrote about them, they tried to erase them, they tried to make them savages, cannibals, and this is what they're going to emphasize in this report. This is from the University of Southern California, or Gale Academic One File, from the American Educational History Journal, Volume 38. Ask any school-age child in Texas public school what they know about the Karankawa tribe, and you will most likely receive a testimony about their despicable savagery, gruesome cannibalism, and general lack of civility and appeal. All right? That's literally what they're telling you here. See, that's what they try to put in the minds of kids. Probing further into the subject, you will find that although students are often convinced that their negative impressions of the Karankawa are factual, much of the lore is anecdotal. Through the years, a great deal has been written about the characteristic of the nomadic Karankawas in trade books, novels, periodicals, and even the pamphlets that are distributed in convenience stores in Galveston, Texas. The traditional literature, for the most part, presents a negative portrayal of the indigenous tribe. However, the unsavory reputation of this native tribe may partially reflect the rationale of white people who infiltrated their lands to first demonize them, all right? They wanted their lands, so they had to demonize them and then annihilate them into extinction, right? So-called extinction. They really extinct? History books informs us that the Karankawa natives captured the original Spanish explorers who accompanied Cabeza de Vaca and kept them as slaves in the 1500s, all right? They captured the Moors and the Sephardic Jews, that they destroyed the last inhabitants of the state's first French settlement, Fort St. Louis, in 1689, all right? So they destroyed that, the French, all right? So they had beef with all those people, right? That they had deadly quarrels with the French pirate Jean Lafitte in Galveston in 1818, and that the soldiers under Sam Houston's command were ordered to kill them on sight. Even the landmarks that acknowledge their existence often do so with a disparaging tone. For example, a newspaper account from Rockport honors a tree where the Karankawa allegedly gathered to feast on their human victims, right? So you see, they're letting you know that, you know, it was all made up. It was just really the conqueror writing the story, or his story, right? Despite alternative, more complementary accounts that are available to any diligent researcher, the Karankawa natives have been traditionally maligned in history books, trade books, and in the corresponding textbooks that were made available to the pre-collegiate public school students in the state of Texas since the late 19th century. Thus, the question arises, to what extent are public schools teaching Texas students authentically or objectively about the Karankawa natives? From archaeological records that supplement historical accounts, we know that for several hundred years, the nomadic Karankawa people lived in the coastal region of the land now known as Texas. Their range extended from the east of Galveston and as far as west as Corpus Christi. Recent archaeological records that utilize radiocarbon dating of artifacts indicate that these Aboriginal people inhabited the coastal region as early as 4,500 years ago. You see, that's a long time. Evidence of their prehistoric inland wanderings has been found as far away as Eagle Lake in Colorado County, which is approximately 100 miles north of Gulf Coast. Numerous anecdotal accounts of the Karankawa's physical appearance from the historical records that date from as far back as the diary of Cabeza de Vaca in 1528 to more recent reports from Stephen F. Austin in 1822 depict them as an attractive tribe, all right? They're an attractive tribe, attractive people. By all accounts, the Karankawa natives were a physically imposing group of people, all right? They were big and muscular, extremely tall, scantily clad, physically adept, and dramatically decorated with tattoos. Piercing and seashells, the coastal natives were an impressive sight to behold. Their deerskin attire scarcely concealed athletic bodies that were tanned by excessive exposure to the sun. Oh, really? They were just like that copper-colored tribes of America and ornately decorated with elaborate tattoos. Furthermore, they were noted for their beautiful white teeth. However, new acquaintances of the Karankawa were shocked when they came in close proximity to the tribe by overwhelming stench of the alligator grease, which they applied liberally to their bodies as protection from mosquitoes. So athletic bodies, right? Tanned athletic bodies. So this is a drawing again of the attractive people. the Karankawas or Kahawas, Karankahagwa, Karankahwa, Karankawa, Karankawa, Kara, Black, Karankawa. It says here from the East Texas Historical Journal, Volume 2, Issue 1, Jean Lafitte, or Jean Lafitte, and the Karankawa Indians by David B. Gracie II. Galveston Island, lying only a short distance from the Texas mainland, was the scene of one of the least known events of Texas history. There, Jean Lafitte, the noted buccaneer, and the Karankawa Indians are supposed to have fought one another over one or more kidnapped Indian women. The conflict occupied 2 or 3 days, but which 2 or 3 is rather vague, since it can be narrowed down only to within a period of some 783 days. Early in the 19th century, the 30-mile-long and 2-mile-wide island was still the home of a large number of deer and birds that fed on the thick marsh and prairie's grass. The principal landmark was a cluster of trees called the Three Threes, known today as the Lafitte's Grove. Since 3 trees stood in a grove, chronicles do not agree as to how many trees there actually were. These trees were somewhere between the center and the west end of the island on a ridge which stood about 12 feet above the surrounding marshes. As this ridge was not frequented by the many snakes on the island, it was the favorite campground of the Karankawa Indians. The Karankawans observed the encroachments of white men on their island hunting grounds with mixed emotions. Undoubtedly, the red men were not happy to have intruders on their ancestral land, but at the same time, much of the material culture of the foreigners was alluring. The Indians kept their sharp jet eyes peeled for opportunities to pick up something of value through beggary, party, or theft. Hope you guys enjoying the presentation so far. So hope you guys are following along what's going on here with the Karankawas and the settlers. What's going on? What are they doing to them? They're taking their land. They're trying to get rid of them, right? I remember one of them was Jean Lafitte, the pirate who took one of their women, and they had a big war. You can read all about it. Supposedly it didn't happen, but supposedly it did. But anyways, you know, he was a bad guy there. They were after him. Eventually, the government, he had to flee. But it says here, guest column, Jean Lafitte was a slave smuggler. Slaves, smugglers, take him down. Who was Jean Lafitte warring with? He wasn't warring with Africans. We know that. He wasn't warring with Africans. He was warring with Karankawa Indians. It says here, Jean Lafitte was a French pirate. A pirate. Who's the pirate? Now that's the hijack with the whitewash images, body snatchers. We already know that, right? And privateer, right? Who operated in the Gulf of Mexico in the early 19th century. He and his older brother Pierre spelled their last name Lafitte, but English languages documents the time used Lafitte. What's the difference? This has become the common spelling in the United States. Lafitte is believed to have been born either in Basque France or the French colony of Saint-Domingue, all right, in Haiti. He might be from Haiti. The Lafitte subsequently became spies for the Spanish during the Mexican War of Independence. In 1817, Jean founded a new colony on Galveston Island named Campeche, which at its height earned millions of dollars annually from stolen or smuggled coin and goods. Very little is known about Lafitte, and speculation about his life and death continues among historians. Now says here, look at this. A number of details about Jean Lafitte's early life remain obscure. Often they contradict each other. In the journal de Jean Lafitte, the authenticity of which is contested, he claims to have been born in Bordeaux, France in 1780 from Sephardic Jewish parents, all right, Sephardic Jews whose converso grandmother and mother fled Spain for France in 1765, like I said, right? After his maternal grandmother was put to death by the Inquisition for Judaizing. Jewish Journal, ahoy mates, there be Jewish pirates. So it says here, another Sephardic pirate played a pivotal role in American history. In the book Jews on the Frontier, Rachel Simmons' 1991 Rabbi Harold Sharman recounts the tale of Sephardic Jewish pirate Jean Lafitte, whose converso grandmother and mother fled Spain for France in 1765 after his maternal grandfather was put to death by the Inquisition for Judaism. Referred to as a corsair, Lafitte went to establish a pirate kingdom in the swamps of New Orleans and led more than 1,000 men during the War of 1812. After being run out of New Orleans in 1817, Lafitte reestablished his kingdom on the island of Galveston, Texas, right where Juneteenth happened, right? Which was known as Campeche. During Mexico's fight for independence, revolutionaries encouraged Lafitte to attack Spanish ships and keep the booty. Now we're in Texas genealogy trails. Welcome to the Gulf Coast region of Texas, says here, Gulf Coast region. It says Texas Gulf Coast stretches for hundreds of miles from the Louisiana border to Brownsville and the Rio Grande, and inland about 60 miles. There are many small towns along the Gulf Coast, but mainly tourist venue exist along the beach areas that are inhabited along the coast. Galveston Island was first settled by Joe de la Porta, along with his brother Morin. All right, listen to this. All right, these are some new characters. Who are these people, right? Galveston Island was what? First settled by Joe de la Porta, along with his brother Morin in 1816. João de la Porta was born in Portugal of Jewish parentage. What do we know about the Portuguese Jews? They were very dark-skinned, very so-called Negro. These are Sephardic Jews too. These are the de la Porta brothers. They financed Galveston Island. Okay, in 1818, Jean Lafitte appointed João supercargo for the Karankawa Indian trade. Listen, they're talking about the Indian slave trade, the Karankawa Indian slave trade. Who's getting freed Juneteenth in Galveston? Who's getting freed? What are you talking about extinct? When Lafitte left Galveston Island in 1820, João became full-time trader, a full-time slave trader. So again, in the advocate.com, it said here, Jean Lafitte was a slave smuggler. So remember, this same Jean appointed João de la Porta supercargo of the Karankawa slave trade. And he's a smuggler himself. What do you think they're talking about? As New Orleans grapples with the legacy of slavery and racism embodied in the city's statues, monuments, street names, and other public displays of honor, the name Lafitte has somehow escaped notice. That's a mistake, because Jean Lafitte and his less famous half-brother peers were prolific slave smugglers. All right, they were doing this with Indians. The Lafitte brothers' early lives are obscure, but Pierre likely arrived in New Orleans in 1803 and began smuggling slaves in the winter of 1805 and 1806. So I want to show you guys what ends up happening when, combine all these factors, where you got these pirate slavers and you got Karankawa Indians who don't want to give up their land. Then you get history, as they were saying, how they try to make these people into savages and act like, they don't know what happened to them. It says here, Smithsonian Miscellaneous Collections, Volume 80. It says here in the Southern Plains that in 1690, the population of the Karankawa was 2,800. By 1907, they were extinct. Right? They were just extinct. They just went extinct like that, right? And here we are in the New International Encyclopedia. This is from 1917. It says here the Karankawa, an extinct tribe of Indians, right? They're extinct now. All of a sudden, they don't exist. What happened? What happened to the Karankawa? Nothing to see here, people. Nothing to see here. They're extinct, right? Formerly occupying the vicinity of Matagorda Bay on the coast of Texas. From the few remains of their language, they appear to have constituted distinct stock. They are first definitely mentioned by the French explorer Joutel in 1687. Shortly afterward, in consequence of the seizure of some of their canoes by the French, they attacked Fort St. Louis and killed or carried off every person of small garrison. At this time, they are said to have been cannibals. All right, so that's the hijack. The greater portion remained uncompromisingly hostile to all settlers, European settlers, as well as to the most of the surrounding tribes, with the result that their number rapidly dwindled. In 1805, they were still estimated at 500 men. In 1818, 300 Karankawa warriors attacked and fought a pitched battle with 200 of Lafitte's pirates and were only repelled with the aid of artillery. Before the close of the Texan War of Independence, they had been nearly wiped out by the American settlers. About the year 1843, the small remnant, some 50 in number, removed to Mexico, whence they were expelled a few years later on account of continued depredations, making their camp near Hidalgo, Texas, where the last of them were exterminated by Mexican ranchers in 1858. So supposedly, they don't exist anymore. So they were famous for the black drink as well. I know you guys know that, but there's a little bit of history again. And see how they just all of a sudden now they're just like, oh, they're extinct, nothing to see here. Don't worry about the Karankawa. So extinct, right? Yeah, right. Says here, Taman, Texas, 1800, 1901 by Ed H. Wharton. Now it says here, João de la Porta, along with his brother Morin, financed the first settlement by Europeans on Galveston Island in 1816. João de la Porta was born in Portugal of Jewish parentage and later became a Jewish Texan trader. What kind of trader? Slave, smuggler, trader? In 1818, Jean Lafitte and appointed João supercargo for the Karankawa Indian trade. When Lafitte left Galveston Island in 1820, João became a full-time trader. They don't want to put the word slave in between it, but they know what they mean, all right? All right, this is history. Texas State Historical Association, De La Porta brothers, the De La Porta brothers, Moses Morin and his younger brother João, or Joseph De La Porta, financed the first settlement by Europeans on Galveston Island in 1816. The brothers were born in Portugal of Jewish parentage, right? Sephardic Jews, Portuguese Jews, very dark, so-called Negroes, all right? These are the first financiers of the first settlement in Galveston. At a young age, they moved to Paris, where they received their schooling. They later sailed to Brazil, to the British West Indies, and to New Orleans. The brothers financed the privateering venture of Louis Michael Ory, all right? Remember the pirate who was there before Jean Lafitte and Jose Manuel de Herrera to San Luis Island. All right, these were like mobsters, later called Galveston in 1816. Ory set up a privateering camp, all right, privateering camp, a slave camp, privateering camp on September 12th and was named military and civil governor of Texas in Galveston Island. You can understand what was really going on here before the whole Juneteenth and before they came and said, hey, you guys are free. Who are they really talking to? Island Empire, the influence of the Maceo family in Galveston, by Tabitha Nicole Boatman, B.A. Thesis prepared for the degree of Masters of Science, University of North Texas. Says here, Jean Lafitte occupied the island until 1820, when United States officials ordered him off the island. By this point, the majority of the Karankawas had been wiped out by the arrival of the Europeans. Had they? Because remember, they're talking about a Karankawa Indian trade. Had they wiped out or been sold into servitude? The group was described by early visitors as simple people with few tools or weapons. Therefore, when the new settlers approached the Indians violently, the natives were unable to protect themselves. The newcomers viciously killed many. Those that survived the attacks were faced with another threat, disease. The group simply could not survive the spread of European disease as seen upon Cabeza de Vaca's arrival. After Lafitte's departure, the remaining Karankawas were killed and removed from the equation. Removed from the equation, right? Not just by killing you, but also by erasing your identity and calling you so-called Negroes or blacks or African slaves. Tagged you African. This occurred when troops attacked them while the group's survivors were distracted with performing a ritual dance. Once the island had been cleared of Lafitte and the Karankawas, once they got rid of the Karankawas, right, the United States took over the territory. The Karankawas, they had to get rid of them, remember. Afterwards, Galveston was shaped by events leading up to Texas' Declaration of Independence. First, Galveston was turned into a port for Mexico. However, after the Texas Revolution, the island became a settlement for the Texas Navy. So once they got rid of the Karankawas Indians, then the United States was able to set up their territory there, right in Galveston. It says here, pirates in Galveston, Emily Layer. Pirates in Galveston, Texas. Galveston, Texas was once home to a private government established in 1816. Galveston was considered a safe haven for pirates to take over other vessels in the Gulf of Mexico. Pirates and revolutionaries raided many merchant ships and vessels along the Gulf Coast. Pirate culture was an all-time high in this era, all right? But the pirates were nothing more than terrorists and robbers, right? These so-called privateers, Jean Lafitte, all right? These people they're financing, these Sephardic Jews financing to go over there, or what we call the modern-day crime bosses. Jose Manuel de Herrera, a Mexican rebel, was the founder who proclaimed Galveston a port of the Mexican Republic by September of 1816. Through 1816 and 1821, slave trading was a major operation in the privateering world. All right, what years? What years? This was foundation of the African slave trade in 1816 to 1820. Are you sure, guys? Are you sure you want to say that? I guess they forgot. Now, how can you be still doing the so-called African slave trade in 1816 to 1821 when the act of prohibiting importation of slaves from anywhere, especially Africa, was already passed in 1807? 1807, that provided that no new slaves were permitted to be imported into the United States. It took effect on January 1st, 1808. 1808, okay? Not after that. So when we go read things like this, that through 1860 and 1821, that's after that. Stop lying. You see how they get caught lying? There's no sources for that. Where's your sources? Show me the slave ships then. Because it was already prohibited in 1807, 1808. So stop lying. Who are they really enslaving? Pirates will smuggle Indians into Galveston to be sold and to make a profit. These pirates acted as Mexican patriots who sought independence from Spanish oppression. The pirates chose Galveston for its prime location. It was an excellent place for a base of operation for privateers, right? Crime bosses, pirates. This area was close to the shipping lanes in Gulf of Mexico and the slaving ports of Cuba. All right, what's going on? Huh? What's going on? What's going on? A Karankawa Indian slave trade. So you misclassify a people, you misrepresent their history, you take their land, you try to erase them, you try to make them savage, you try to say they went extinct, right? Then you got articles like this, right? The island they called home, the disappearance of the Karankawa, the disappearance. They disappeared, just like the Maya disappeared, right? Just like all these tribes disappeared, right? You're still here. This is by the undergraduate research scholars thesis by Andrew William Althusser, submitted to the undergraduate research scholars program at Texas A&M University in partial fulfillment of the requirements for the designation as an undergraduate research scholar. May 2018, Maritime Studies. Again, the island they called home, the disappearance of the Karankawa, Andrew William Althusser, Department of Liberal Studies, Texas A&M University. In the examination of primary source documents pertaining to the Karankawa of Galveston, there exist few sources. The literature is sparse and contains bias from early Europeans who were first to discover the Texas Gulf Coast region. Taking this into consideration, the use of this literature must be cautious. I support theories with archaeological evidence or content analysis. In 1820, Moses Austin would receive permission from the Spanish governor to settle 300 tracts of land along the Texas Gulf Coast, all right? Moses Austin would pass away in 1821, and his son Stephen F. Austin would inherit the land tracts and the responsibility of settling the 300 families in Texas. Stephen F. Austin had experienced the native problem. Before arriving in Galveston, Austin made it his first order of business upon arrival to the Barrier Island to address the Karankawa. All right, the problem, who's the native problem? The Karankawa. Now, just like Maison Rouge, he was supposed to settle 300 families there. Now, these 300 families, foreign all, Europeans, it most likely is the same case. We're dealing with the same kind of government, the Spanish, right? Spanish land grants, same thing. He would converse with community leaders of the Campeche settlement that was located on the east end of Galveston, located the Karankawa's region of occupation. Upon arrival, Stephen F. Austin would camp adjacent to the Karankawa campsite, so he set up shop right next to them on purpose on Galveston in an attempt to bolster his presence and make known he would not be passive in dealing with the native people. Prior to Austin's arrival, literature supports that the inhabitants of Campeche settlement observed a strong indigenous presence, hundreds of warriors in canoes, and mostly cohabited on the island peacefully, with the indigenous occupying the far western end of the island while Campeche was located on the far eastern. Now, it says down here that taken directly from a historical journal kept by Stephen F. Austin during his efforts to settle the Texas Gulf Coast, an entry dated September 17, 1821 states, these Indians and the Karankawas may be called universal enemies to man. This is what he's saying about the Karankawas, enemies to man. They killed all nations that came in their power and frequently feast on the bodies of their victims. See how he's lying and making them cannibals. You see what they did? The approach of an American population will be the signal of their extermination, for there will be no way of subduing them but extermination. You see what they're saying about the Karankawas? and the Atakapas. There's a lot of other tribes there. This excerpt from Austin's journal is a primary source and irrefutable evidence that the rights of the Karankawa people of Galveston, where the Juneteenth thing happened, right, were not protected by neither the instructions and regulations for the alcaldes or the Committee of Vigilance and Correspondence. All right, so they were at the mercy of anything. So becoming enslaved, that's one of the main things. This denial of basic human rights clearly marks a positive indicator that the colonial policy of Stephen F. Austin has a strong correlation to the decline of indigenous quality of life. Settlers under the Stephen F. Austin would follow the guidance set forth by their new leader and perpetuate anti-Karankawa views. It was even reported among Campeche Galveston settlement inhabitants that under Austin's policy, business of the day was hunting the red man. Hunting the red man, so-called red man, copper-colored tribes of America, so-called red man with parentheses, you see, they know. The creation of human rights policy for the indigenous and the immediate denial of said rights to the Karankawa fueled a lawless campaign of native people removal, where do they put them? In missions or in plantations. Soldiers and the settlers alike would not hesitate to answer Karankawa presence with violence. Under Austin's civil policies, violence could be conducted without fear of punishment. Karankawa children were kidnapped. Where were they taken, these children, right? They just disappeared. Oh no, they disappeared. They went extinct into thin air. They just disappeared into thin air. Oh, now you're giving us the drop now. Now you're giving us the drop. Women would be raped and taken while the native men were offered no quarters and often attacked and killed on sight. Often, basic infractions such as the theft would warrant a hunting party of colonials to band together and engage Karankawa at their homes and villages, killing innocent women and children along the way. Infractions such as these would further the dehumanization of the indigenous, which would continue to deny native people sanctuary as they tried to relocate under the new pressure as their ill-seen reputation would precede them. In 1824, Austin and a group of 90 men would pursue the fleeing native people as far south as the Mexican border and come full circle to the Matagorda Bay along the Texas Gulf Coast. This is where the final address of Austin and the Karankawa would be made. Seemingly broken, the indigenous people could run no longer and would seek sanctuary at the Spanish mission, La Bahia. They were so desperate. Remember what they did. They got rounded up. They got backed up into the mission, and the padre said, yo, come in, I'll save you, come in. And they had no choice. It was that or death. Orchestrated by the priests of the mission, Austin and Karankawa chief Antonio would make a peace treaty, an agreement that would force the Karankawa to settle west of La Vaca River. This treaty would be renewed later in 1827. However, the defiant nature of the Karankawa would continue to cause issues as the native people refused recognize the agreement to remain west of the river. Kidnapping the children, raping the women, massacring the men, enslaving the men, trading them, relocating them, expelling them, right? Enslaving them. It says here, unearthed in truth, the future of Sugar Land, Texas, depends on its bitter past. It says here, despite its sweet name, Sugar Land is built on a series of tormented past. In 1823, a Southern pioneer and impresario, a Spanish word for entrepreneur, Stephen F. Austin, all right, acquired modern-day Fort Bend County through a Mexican land grant. Austin and other Texan colonists drove out the native Karankawa people by force and settled 300 Southern families there. So they drove them out by force, right? They drove them out. Where did they drive them out to? Where do they go? Fort Bend, to which Sugar Land belongs. Sugar Land became Sugar Land. The Karankawa's land became Sugar Land. Is located by the lower valley of the Brazos River, a fertile floodplain in the center of transportation and commerce. The Karankawa tribe was believed to be extinct by 1891. So you see what happened. Do you guys understand, overstand? Or are you going to keep holding on to Pan-African old pseudo doctrines? There's a real history. A real people went through these horrible things. There's a real story to be told here. All right, remember, all this happened after 1816. Come on. This is very recent. What so-called African slaves? They're grabbing the Karankawa's fertile land. red stick, people of the red stick, right? Cane, sugar cane. It's not a stick in the mud. Like the Empress Washita said, it's not just a stick in the mud. They mean the sugar cane, people of the red stick. Shout out to my boy Rob. Shout out to Rob in Texas. And these were the people inhabiting this land, this fertile land that they had to drive out. Where did they go? These all became plantations. So where did these people go? Where do you think they went? They put them to work in the plantations. Not only did Austin secure this land through massacre, he and the southern settlers brought with them the practice of slavery to sugar land. In fact, he distributed land proportionate to the number of slaves the families owned. More slaves meant more wealth. Between 1820s and 1850s, the enslaved African Americans, you just drove out the Karankawa. We know these are people of dark color too. Them and the Atakapas, where did they go? Huh? You kidnapped all their kids. Where did they go? But again, sugar land, that was the Karankawa land. That's why they needed to remove them and enslave them for the free labor. It all worked out for them. It all worked out for them. So we come all the way back to Juneteenth, right? Juneteenth in Galveston, Texas, which is Indian territory. They just got there in the 1800s. I hope you guys understand what we're showing here. It says International Indigenous Society of all religions of God and faith. You know, even though it may seem crazy what they're saying, they might have a point here. Let's see what they're saying. It says Galveston Island was a slavery empire founded by French pirate Jean Lafitte. We did establish that. That's a fact. He was financed by two brothers, Jewish traders, Joe and Morin de la Porta. That was also a fact. They were known as the Karankawa traders and supercargos for Lafitte. Also a fact. Growing incredibly wealthy and decimating the Indian population, all called Karankawa, and subsequently a great many were called so-called African or black. You see, they were called what? African or black. This is what we're telling you. They started calling these people Africans or black slaves. Pirate Jean Lafitte was targeted eventually by the U.S. Navy and fled Galveston in 1821 with his mulatto wife and son. How easily history could be altered, false narratives could be created, and people could believe them. It can happen so easily. It says here a critical bibliography on North American Indians for K to 12th grade. National Museum of Natural History, Washington, D.C. Says here from Betsy Warren. Indians who lived in Texas. This brief overview of the Indian tribes of Texas provides information on their appearance, dwellings, food, crafts, and subsistence patterns. The last topic of each section is titled End of Culture, which is misleading since many of these cultures still exist, if not in Texas, all right? They're still there. In another state, the author summarizes the contributions of Texas Indians as follows. When the white man came to Texas, he learned many things from the Indians that helped him to live on the frontier and develop the state. Geographic names remains as evidence of our rich Indian heritage. Some of the author's descriptions as stereotypical and demonstrate Eurocentric attitudes. For instance, the Humanos had a strange way of greeting visitors. And then says here, they, the Karankawa, had huge heads covered with coarse, bushy hair. The Karankawa, they had heads covered with coarse, bushy hair. Wow. And we're here. And this book is called Indians Who Lived in Texas, written and illustrated by Betsy Warren. Look at this in the cover. You see how she drew the American Indian, copper-colored tribes of America. You see that brown complexion, cinnamon hue, swarthy, tawny, copper-colored tribes of America, so-called red man. Do you see how she drew it? You see where I got the cover of this video, the thumbnail. I'm not making it up. I didn't draw it. Somebody else did. It says here the tribes of Karankawas and Atakapas lived in more primitive manner than the Caddo and Wichita farmers. Perhaps this was because they had to roam continuously along the coastal waters in order to find enough food for their families. Usually they camped less than a week in one place, but returned to it each year. They moved across the bays and lagoons in frail dugout canoes, made by tree trunks cut in half and hollowed out by scraping or burning. The canoe, about 15 inches wide and 40 to 50 feet long, was long enough to hold a man, his family, and their possessions. All right, that's on page 23. Continues, says, appearance. The Karankawa men were tall, powerfully built people who wore pieces of cane pushed through holes made in the lower lip and on each side of the chest. The Atakapa people were short and stout. They had huge heads covered with coarse, bushy hair. Their cheekbones were especially high, and their large lips protruded over teeth stained from the various leaves which they chewed. So now you know who was really there in Galveston, Texas. And remember, these Europeans just got there in the 1800s, and they were having trouble settling there the whole time with the Karankawa and the Atakapas and the other tribal people that were there. They weren't letting them settle. They had to get rid of them. That was their number one goal. They stated that in primary sources. This is history. We know the United States was not importing any so-called slaves or servants into the country by 1808. By the time Galveston, Jean Lafitte, and all them established their permanent settlements, that was already over. So anybody they were using for labor was local people. We know Jean Lafitte and the other Portuguese de la Portas had a Karankawa Indian slave trade going on. And their number one goal was to remove them from that prestigious fertile land to establish their sugarland plantations and eventually the prestigious Galveston city. Not sure if any of you think this proves anything or debunks anything, but I hope there's some logical people out there, and I hope that based on the previous presentations, we've been here 5 years, over 300 presentations, showing primary sources, showing who the American Indians were. We have primary sources describing them. We know they told us there was many nations here, even so-called Negro or Black nations like in Africa. We've already seen the references, numerous references. We're doing genealogy. It's all matching up. We know that these Sephardic Jews and these original Europeans were also people of color, so-called Negro people. It's a more on more war. Shout out to 432 The Drop Radio. Hope you guys can see that it's been nothing but false narratives being passed down to us, and then we get these days like Juneteenth. All right, so I hope you guys understand when it says happy, proud, and happy Juneteenth here. Now you understand a little bit better, or understand a little bit better what that means. Because honestly, the burden of proof is really on the Pan-Africanist and anybody saying these are African people. You got to show me the records, show me the slave ship. This is already in the 1800s. Come on. Again, the burden of proof is on you, and you don't have it and you know it. It's silly to continue this. It's silly to continue this. And it's an atrocity to not honor and respect who this really happened to and what really happened to the indigenous people of this area and this land. All the history and all the struggle they went through, all the wars they went through to protect their culture, their heritage, and their land. And eventually they were erased and labeled so-called African, so-called Black, or said they went extinct. And that is just wrong. Thanks for tuning in today, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed this presentation. Much love and respect. Hawa.
Next question, Chief, is your name.
Oh, Michael Amos. I'm the principal chief of the tribe.